Hi everyone, welcome to this month's EA View on the archetype of Pisces. My name is Chahal and I'm joined today by my wonderful colleagues and astrologers. We have Bess Strzelecki, we've got Jordyn Smith, we've got Deva Green, and hopefully Stacie Pazura will be dropping in a bit later and joining us too. So the archetype of Pisces. So ladies, I was actually thinking about how to start this presentation because with Pisces, as you all know, it's a little bit, what's the word? You can't really find the words because there's no kind of boundaries with the archetype of Pisces. There's a range of archetypes that we can look into when it comes to Pisces. We've got like transcendence, we've got disillusionment, we've got victimhood, we've got loss. Though it sounds like we're falling into a little bit of a negative connotation, that's not what Pisces represents. Ultimately, what Pisces correlates to and symbolically is consciousness. And when we talk about consciousness, it's about the oneness, the timeless, the spiritual. And it's because consciousness doesn't really have a form, it takes the form of whatever structure we put the consciousness into. For example, we're human beings and our structure is the human body. And all of creation has a structure. Sorry, they all have consciousness and the structure depends on what it's being put into. For example, Earth is conscious. We have animals who are conscious. We have plants who are conscious. And the only key difference is the self-awareness that consciousness has. And what we're all doing is ultimately, it will all lead to transcendence at the end of the day. We're all here in an experience of evolution, and we will eventually dissolve back into the waters of source, energy, God, goddess, whatever term you want to call that. And it's about evolution. Pisces being the 12th sign in the zodiac is the last sign in the zodiac, and it's where we dissolve back into those waters before the zodiac cycle starts again, which is with the star sign of Aries, which is the birthing archetype. Ladies, I don't know if you want to add some comments in terms of how you see Pisces and understand its archetypical nature. Anybody want to drop anything?
Right,
Yeah.
and
Go ahead.
dovetailing off what you said, Rob, it's also culmination that when we see Pisces or 12th house, that the intention is to bring everything in that past cycle to a resolution point, fruition and completion, so that the next cycle can start, which we see in Aries, and often we're left standing on that precipice because everything's coming to a place of closure. And we often feel that we're stepping into that abyss of sorts, or that we're surrendering everything so that we know what comes next. And so we're in that place, that place of the unmanifested manifested, or the place where things are in disillusion, so that what's meant to be can come to be, which in my view takes a lot of surrendering.
Yes.
And a lot
Jordyn?
of faith.
Yes, I was just going to add the word faith because there has to be a trust that there's something more to come. Yeah. Jordyn?
Yeah, I was actually going to speak kind of about exactly what Deva was saying, that there's a culmination process. And so there's a surrendering. And so not trying to control, going through the polarity of Virgo, that there, in order to have the healing and the union that Pisces can bring, there needs to be the surrender. So that's what I was going to add.
Yeah.
I would also just add that it's like, in order to kind of know the self, you have to know the other, the external, the higher, in order to kind of be able to figure out your own container and know that it's not separate. There's, connection, and pulling from that is really powerful.
Yeah. It's interesting because I know Pisces doesn't correlate to death. That tends to be linked more to the archetype of Scorpio in astrology. But what it is, it's an ending of the ego identity. That's where you have, being a water sign. You've got Cancer, which is a water sign, in Scorpio, the water trinity that exists. So you go from Cancer, the ego, to Scorpio, the soul, to Pisces, the spirit. And it's kind of seeing that kind of connection in knowing that it's just the end of one cycle, the accumulation of one cycle merging back into source. So there can be like a re-emergence of another cycle, hence the next 12 signs of the zodiac coming into play. And it's just that full journey where it's that connectedness to the whole of consciousness, whether it's humans, plants, animals, that we're all connected and we're all going to end in the same journey, heading towards the same journey. Yeah. So we're just going to be moving on to the transit of the month, which is the full moon in Virgo. Jordyn, if you want to start us off with this one.
Sure. So this full moon is really about self-improvement, self-adjustment through the purification of the past, is what I see whenever I look at this, and that there's a need to really act, right? And so I want to kind of break down some of the conversations that are going on while this full moon is occurring. So we have the full moon in Virgo, and it is ruled by Mercury in the sign of Pisces. And Mercury in the sign of Pisces is really wanting us to get out of the Virgo linear logic. It's wanting us to really tap into our intuition. And there's some repeating signatures here that involve this Mercury in Pisces, because there's also a square with the moon, a T-square going on with the moon, Mars, the sun, and Neptune. But the moon is opposing Neptune, and it's in a new phase conjunction. And so we're all being called during this culmination process, as full moons symbolize, to really start a new phase of dissolving old ideals or things that are getting in the way of us making correct act through discernment and through our intuition. We also have Pluto at an anaretic degree, also symbolizing culmination, because it's at 29 degrees Capricorn, and it's squaring the nodal axis, with the resolution node being Scorpio and being ruled by that Pluto in Capricorn. And so we're all being asked to really reflect on where we need to show up for ourselves, where maybe self-defeating thoughts or self-judgment is getting in the way of us making a correct action. And Pluto's ruler, Saturn, is also at 29 degrees, and it's in a semi-sextile to that. And so there's this need and this inner friction that comes from the semi-sextile to really want to not only reflect, but get to the bottom of these core dynamics in our psychology and in our emotional needs. That way we can liberate from them, and we can liberate from old ideals. So things that have been conditioned upon us that maybe aren't in resonance with whom we naturally are. This full moon really speaks to getting back in touch with whom we naturally are. We also have Saturn in a disseminating trine to the South Node, meaning that if we are reflecting and observing and relying on our intuition, that we can have this information really come to us as a way to have that liberation that we're all seeking on a soul level. We also have, I stated this a little bit earlier, the moon is in a T-square to Mars with the sun and Neptune that's in that new phase conjunction. And so there's a need to really act. There's action that needs to be taken. And it's through understanding what and where we might be holding on to self-perfectionism or self-defeating thoughts, implied with this, Capricorn archetype that we're really needing to release and dissolve away. So that way we can see the truth of our situation. And then we can make a correct judgment through discernment and our intuition as to how to go about doing what it is that we need to do. We also have the ruler Mercury in a trine with the South Node, and it's in a first quarter trine. And so there's things that have come to a standstill. We're needing to, there's this, not only is there friction, but there's this pressure for us to really get to the bottom of where we're allowing our thoughts and our old beliefs to get in the way of what our truth is. The moon is also in an inconjunct with Chiron, Jupiter, and Venus. And this really symbolizes that readjustment, realignment process that this full moon in Virgo is also indicating. And this is about needing to go and to act, right? To get all of that energy is ruled by Mars, which is also square that full moon. So there's this need to go within and to intuit what it is that we need to do to make a choice and then to act on that. And the readjustment can occur through us doing simply that, to act on our values, to get to the bottom of where we felt, powerless in the past, to have action and to get after it. We can feel stuck and fixed because of some of the fixed energy that's going on with this full moon. But there's a lot of mutable energy here that says, as long as you put one foot in front of the other, that the counteraction from acting, there becomes a reaction, so we can understand whom we naturally are even more and implement those new values that are coming in. The sun is sextile Uranus. Uranus is trine this moon. And when we think of Uranus being in Taurus, we all know that this past year we have been in an acceleration of radically altering how we are inwardly relating with ourselves. And with the sun here, it is, wanting us to not only dissolve old values, old ways of thinking, old ways of being, but to also, how do I want to put this? There's a natural sextile between Pisces and Taurus that occurs. And this really symbolizes coming back to where we came from, coming back to where whom we naturally are through source, through goddess, through creatress. And so with this and the trine that this is making as well to the moon, we have a propensity to be able to have acceleration and understanding whom we naturally are and allowing that process to reveal who we are. And one last thing I wanted to mention is that this full moon is conjunct Lilith. Lilith is such a powerful symbol. I have been diving into this archetype recently, and to me, this really speaks to getting back to that inner feminine that's inside of all of us and not allowing our conditioning that has allowed us to feel guilty about how we go about making choices, if we say no, when we say yes, and really diving into the natural archetype of, if we put one foot forward and we create action, we get a natural reaction that then allows us to naturally self-adjust and stay, instead of staying stuck in self-defeating guilt, shame, judgment. And so that is my spiel on this full moon. And if you guys have thoughts about it, tell me. I want to hear. Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to add was, because you mentioned the Lilith, spot on in terms of, I agree with you in terms of that natural feminine trust, that intuition part definitely plays in, especially with the sun in Pisces. I always see it as, trust your dream world, trust your gut instinct, have faith in whatever messages are coming through. And you've got that square to Mars in Gemini, I think it's a perfect time to meditate, to write, to journal, And to get back into your body, you've got Uranus in Taurus. Virgo is very much about the practical, step by step with the, to do with health as well. So just trust what's coming through to you rather than looking outside of yourself for the answers. It's a quite a very healing full moon, like you mentioned. And it's, with that Saturn 29 degrees in Aquarius, before it moves into Pisces, I think it's that opportunity to step out a little bit of the illusions that maybe are surrounding you, and just to detach and be the observer of the physical reality, and know there's a connection between the physical reality and the spiritual. Do you know what I mean in that sense?
I absolutely know what you mean. This made me think of also with Ceres and Libra. I think so often so many of us abandon who we are, right? And we feel guilty about saying no, or having healthy boundaries, or going after what it is that we're really wanting to go after. And so there's also this reclamation of coming back into balance, allowing the interior to match the exterior and to live within that. And I wanted to pull that in because I honestly didn't write it down as a talking point, but I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this, and I feel like that's a really big component, especially because that Ceres is retrograde. So there's a resolving process about coming back into balance. And then, it's ruled by Venus and Aries that is in conjunct this full moon and Lilith. And so there's this big piece of really going after what it is you want to go after too, but just allowing yourself to drop into your body, like you said, and to really trust that if you are honoring whom you naturally are, instead of trying to fit society standards with this 29-degree, Pluto and Capricorn, if you can just rely on yourself and to really dive into that part, that balance can come back. That readjustment that is necessary can come back, but it is through not getting stuck, not being afraid to do something. It's about, you've got to take action with this full moon as well, to further our learning. So I love that. I love your reflection, Rav. Thank you.
Anybody else want to make a comment?
I just want to make a simple comment, which is that, when we're in a situation where we are working with dynamics of self-improvement and getting things kind of out of the chaos, one of the best ways to work with that energy is to serve, because the focus is on, helping, and sometimes you're able to really step outside of yourself and to see, hey, I'm making a difference for this person. Although you should never be attached to the result. That's something that we can fall into sometimes. But if your heart is just really focused on the service of something, a lot of the thinking just comes out of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, Stacie.
Hi.
Right, Stacie, and to your point too, looking at that Uranus North Node conjunction, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do and focus on making the efforts for the effort's sake, and knowing that if your heart is in it for the right and pure intentions, all will be well. Seeing the Pisces energy, trusting that you'll be given what you need as resources as you take those steps, and the values and the effort.
Yes. I also love that, with this full moon, it looks like there's an opportunity to release where you've been holding yourself back, with that moon conjunct Lilith. Where can you come into some more of your own natural power? And there's protection through connection with the Piscean element here.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, ladies. That was really healing for myself, to be honest. Being a Virgo with a strong Pisces, that actually resonates a lot. So just moving on from the full moon in Virgo, we're going to link it into the herb of the month, which is very Piscean in nature, I'm sure. And we're going to have Bess going to tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, sure. So what I love about fennel is it's very utilitarian. I mean, it's kind of easy to work with. You can use it as a tea. There's essential oil. You can eat, it's common in cooking. You can cook it kind of like you would celery. It's very nutrient dense. It's high in vitamin C and iron and magnesium and rich in antioxidants. Its uses most normally are for things like it's really great for after digestion. A lot of sort of Mediterranean cultures will eat it after a meal to help with digestion or any cramping or irritable bowel. There's been really good scientific research recently on its ability to help with joint pain and arthritis, and also with eyesight. It's been known to improve eyesight and help with pressures around glaucoma, like high pressure in the eyes. You can also use it as like a sort of like an eye wash. You can make some fennel tea and let it cool, and you can rub your eyes in. And if you have conjunctivitis or inflammation of the eyelids, it's really good to use. And what else? The Roman army used fennel seeds to curb hunger on long marches and give courage to men. So it does, if you're someone who like gets hunger pangs, it's definitely useful for that. Fennel seed tea is great for bronchitis or a heavy cough. It can be used for menstrual cramps and for menopausal symptoms, and it increases breast milk. It does kind of act like an estrogen. So if you are pregnant or have any allergies to the carrot family, this is one you want to watch. It's magical and like metaphysical uses. It's been used for protection and fertility rites and great for initiation rites. And it helps those who are trying to shed the past and see the future with new and brighter eyes.
Nice. I've had to Google fennel because I was like, I swear I've grown up with this, and we have because in Indian culture, we make tea using a lot of like herbs and stuff. And fennel is a very popular used in Punjabi tea, which is called saunf, if anyone's listening. And it's the only key ingredient you use in tea to make Indian tea, and it's delicious. I'll have to send you guys the recipe. But I've just sat here and realized, and being a strong Mercury as well, I'm like, that's been perfect for me for most of my life. So thanks for that. Makes me feel good. Yeah. So that was the herb of the month. Just moving on. Now we're going to be talking about our fingerprint of the month. I have to admit, she's one of my favorite actresses. I have grown up watching her. And when Bess suggested that we look at Drew Barrymore, I was like,
Jordyn.
Oh, was it Jordyn? Sorry. When you mentioned let's talk about her, I was like, yes, I'm going to enjoy this one. So Bess, if you want to just give us a little bit of bio, if you can summarize her career and her life.
Absolutely.
Let's dive into
this. She's an actress whose life story sounds like a movie in itself. She comes from a long line of actors, 7 generations, in fact, I think 400 years. Her father was an actor and also an alcoholic, and they were estranged most of their life. Her mother, an actress, started taking Drew to auditions when she was an infant, and she was in her first commercial for dog food before she was even a year old. When her parents divorced when Drew was 9, her mom started partying and bringing Drew to parties. So she was going to Studio 54 in the hot nightclubs and was out and about. And but before that, sorry, I should back up. At 5, she had her big screen debut. At 7, she landed one of her most famous roles in E.T. and Steven Spielberg, who is her godfather, believe it or not. And and then she went on to like become the youngest host of Saturday Night Live. And but yeah, it was sort of child stardom and the hardships that came with. And by 8, she was partying several nights a week with her mom. By 11, she developed a drinking problem. By 12, she was addicted to drugs. By 13, she had cut her wrists and was hospitalized. And she spent 1.5 years in rehab. And when she came out, she got herself emancipated and she was living on her own. It sounded like a very difficult time. She cleaned toilets and worked menial jobs in restaurants to pay her bills when the film opportunities were scarce because of her reputation at the time. And by the time she was 17, she was sort of back in the swing of it and acting in films that trended with her bad girl image, which, you know, like Poison Ivy and Gun Crazy, but that wasn't ultimately what she really wanted to do. And in the late 90s, she was able to scope out roles for herself in the romantic comedy field that she was more appealing to her. And she ultimately founded her own production company called Flower Films. And they produce movies such as Never Been Kissed, Charlie's Angels, 50 First Dates. In 2009, she made her director's debut with Whip It, which is a film about a teenage misfit, and that same year she was in Grey Gardens, which is a film based on the life stories of Jackie Kennedy's aunt and first cousin, who were very eccentric. And most recently, she's launched her own talk show. So we're going to look at the transits of that. And then, you know, on the personal front, she had 2 quick marriages in her mid-20s, and she currently has 2 children with her ex, who they are amicably co-parenting 2 daughters, ages 8 and 10. And that's kind of Drew in a nutshell.
No, that's very well summarized, because she's lived like 2 lives. That's what I keep hearing, that she's had 2 lifetimes basically in this incarnation.
Unreal.
So yeah, so we're just so let's dive into her birth chart from an evolutionary astrology point of view. So yes, Deva, do you want to start us off with the Pluto archetype?
Yeah, from what I understand, she's in the first stage individuated, which means that she's just coming out of learning how the ropes work, getting to the top of the ladder, and breaking into more her individuated self from a Jungian point of view. Who am I outside of societal norms, outside of societal customs, and so on. And seeing that Pluto's in the 5th house, then in Libra retrograde, she has a sense of needing to empower herself or to take control of her special destiny in a way that counteracts or throws off the expectations of others in general. Seeing that it's retrograde, there's going to be a repeat, relive dynamic in order for that to come to fruition, or in order for the retrograde to be realized, the individuated expression of it. And in my view, the earlier part of her life was really throwing her back on those intentions to self-empower in a way that reflected her sense of higher purpose, higher meaning. Seeing that North-South node is in the 12th in Gemini, it was like it threw her back in a way to where she could communicate her vision of herself, or who she was outside of the expectations and at times fantasies of others. And in my view, part of that's being the bad girl. And as a way of showing that she's liberating from it, and seeing that the ruler of that then is Mercury, which is in Aquarius in the 9th house. That's also the rebellion, or the throwing off of the status quo relative to her personal truth. And seeing that the polarity point then is Aries in the 11th house, that also speaks to being a group of one, to essentially asserting her own voice, her own independence, to counteract the expectations of others. And in my view, that's a linchpin or a core point that created the difficulties in early childhood, in terms of perhaps falling into despair or meaninglessness, or wanting to escape. And it was her way of saying, this isn't my honest truth, this isn't me. And seeing the North Node being in Sag, then in the 6th, through that process being able to discern her own personal truth, and seeing that Venus is conjunct Jupiter, which would then be in the 10th house. I have a quote by her that I feel really shows how she integrated, or how she took this all in. And she says, there's a big difference between being alone and being lonely. You can feel alone in a group of people. I prefer my own company. So it's really her way of saying that through this process, she was able to determine on her own what has a higher meaning, what has ultimate meaning and value, and what doesn't. And as she says, seeing the Libra element, you can be standing in a group of people and feel unheard, or to not feel that you're truly connected, seeing the Pisces energy, or emotionally connecting, but rather it can emphasize or reinforce the feeling of aloneness. And another quote that I have, which I think really shows the natural teaching capacity that she has, is she says, "It's only through listening that you learn, and I never want to stop learning." North Node being in Sag, and then the Libra or the Venus conjunct the Jupiter North Node. It's a way of her taking back her personal energies, taking control, and rather than feeling ashamed by her past, having those be learning opportunities or opportunities to grow, which comes through the dynamic of listening and defining on her own terms what's her truth and what's not.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Deva. It's interesting because you talk about the Pluto retrograde in the fifth house for her in Libra. The fifth house is naturally the childhood house, childhood environment, and we know straight away that she was powerless. She didn't choose to be an actress at 11 months old. The choices were made for her. So there's that sense of powerlessness. And an interesting fact in evolutionary astrology is we can also look at the south node of Pluto, and it is actually conjunct her eighth house Mars at 23 degrees Capricorn. So she's come into a lifetime where there was going to be a powerlessness from the get-go. It's for her to be empowered, to empower herself in her lifetime. So that I found that very interesting, where her environment was set up. She has picked up from where she left off, the retrograde archetype, relive, redo, relive. And straight from childhood was going to be her get-go. And yeah, she has, found her path and her way. And it's just interesting to see how astrology can actually show you the exact kind of dynamics that can come into play. But of course, she's made her choices, which she's empowered herself. And hence her first state individuated is not being in the consensus stage, wanting to break into her own individuality, like you mentioned. Right, I have actually forgotten who was going to cover what archetype. So I'm just going to pass it on to Jordyn to just, what you wanted to speak about in terms of her chart.
Yeah, so I am doing Pisces intercepted in the 10th house, and Uranus retrograde is in a trine to her MC. And to me, with interceptions, this can really indicate where someone has really been able to actualize what that dynamic is entailing, and on the flip side where they haven't been able to do that at all, and they're needing to really work on that. And with Drew, with Pisces in the 10th house, this is a soul intercepted. This is a soul who is really reclaiming her natural, authentic voice, the truth of who she is, being able to listen to herself, ask and answer her own questions, 10th house kind of dynamics, and being her own natural authority. And with Uranus retrograde, Scorpio trining this, part of that piece of the puzzle for her has been childhood trauma, getting to the bottom of it through the resolving it in this lifetime and using it in a way to disseminate information to gain her natural authority. To be a natural authority, she's in the first stage of individuated. That means stepping outside of the status quo and being a natural leader through talking and disseminating about the trauma that she went through in childhood and how that affected her, and how she has created psychological and emotional resilience with this by understanding what her own natural values and needs are in this lifetime, and then using that as a catalyst to be her own person, her own sovereign individual outside of whom her mom wanted her to be. She's not being a show pony, not doing it the way that mom wanted her to do it, and doing it very naturally. And also you can see that later on in her life, like Bess was stating, she used that natural voice, that natural authority that she's been gaining from her getting to the bottom of her psychological nature from her trauma of the past, to be able to get after what it is she wants to get after, what roles she wants to play. And then later on being someone who now has a talk show and gets to bring on people who get to talk about these dynamics and, you know, every shade of gray in between. So that is what I see with this signature.
Yeah, I love
Well,
that. I think it gets
yeah.
reiterated too, with her Pallas conjunct her sun in Pisces up there in the 10th on the midheaven. And it's like she needs to step into her own feminine wisdom in this lifetime and her own personal power. And it's like, if she can dream it, she can do it. And at one point she was so disillusioned, she didn't even know what she wanted. She didn't know what she could want. And I love that, you know, her wisdom's not coming from books. She didn't graduate high school. She is very gifted in the arts as an actress, as a producer, as a director. And that comes through a deeper knowing. That comes through a knowing through connection. It comes from, you know, a creative inspiration. And I, you know, with it being a skip step and the resolution being her north node, it's like, you know, she really had to put in the work and show up every day and act on her truths and create from that place.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the Pisces intercepted. Well, the ruler of that is her Neptune in the 6th house in Sagittarius, and it is conjunct her North Node. And it was films, movies, creativity was always going to be her way, you know. And that was the introduction that she had in her life. And with that being conditioned by the Scorpio 6th house, she took her power back when it came to, you know, you say that she set up her own production company and she chose the movies that she was going to direct and be in. And they were actually very well chosen movies. They all did very well, you know, from like Never Been Kissed is one of my all-time favorite films, and Charlie's Angels just kind of set that stage. They all embodied the characters. So she's very intuitive in terms of what project she's taken on. And she stepped into her power, like you said. And that conjunction with the North Node is showing us that she's in that new phase conjunction where she's looking to step into her power. This is probably one of the first lifetimes where she's probably did in a previous incarnation. This is where, like I said, she's picked up from where she left off. And she knew at 14, if she wanted to get better, she had to separate, you know. And it's not like her parental relationship has been quite turbulent, but she's been supporting her mother since she's been earning, you know. She still financially supports her mother, I believe. And she just knew she had to take her power back and nurture herself, you know, become her own kind of, actually heal that inner child first, and then step into her own power. But yeah, so Stacie, you were going to talk about the Venus energy in her chart. That's all
Yes,
to do with self-worth and self-love.
yes, Venus, which is conjunct Jupiter. But yes, with Venus, it being on the 29th degree of Pisces, we see a soul that is really just intending to get into the core of what means something to her, what life and existence means to her. She called it an experience where she did not have a father figure, a healthy father figure who was present. She experienced a lot of abuse, was introduced to alcohol at an extremely young age, and she was rewarded for it. Because without a father figure, you're going to be a little more, well, not everyone, but she was kind of looking for that validation from older father figures. And she found a few, and she developed some very deep relationships with, you know, say Steven Spielberg and Stephen King, and it got really close to these people. But really what it came down to, it was, you know, fun and exciting while it happened, but there came a point where it became obvious that it just, you know, going out and partying and leaving your concerns within your life just isn't, it isn't going to produce anything. It isn't going to move you forward. And I know that when she was put into rehab at the young age of, what was it, 13? Was it 13?
Mm.
Yeah, she was there
Yeah.
for 18 months. That's a year and a half. That's a long time. And she sure had a lot of anger towards her mother for putting her through that experience, just because it wasn't foreseen and it was a big shock and she was stuck there for so much time. But in the end, it really did allow her to do a lot of reflection on herself and to get her priorities in line according to what she wanted. And she's still doing it to this day. I know that there was one of her divorces, she did kind of relapse back into finding alcohol as a comfort, but from what I understand, quickly got out of that. You know, and I'll tell you, alcoholism is not, you know, it can be a very difficult monster because it's so easy to escape all of the pressures. And if you have the choice of, like, are you going to deal with it versus just escape for one more day, I can see how it's easy to do that. But next thing you know is your whole life is just dissipating before your eyes and you haven't lived it. And so I think that through that process, she has, you know, and not having the father figure, I mean, she had other father figures, but not a stable father who really showed her the ropes and showed her the discipline. She just had to figure that out on her own. And so that was a very, she had to grow up pretty quick because of that. And, you know, one of the things that I really appreciate about Drew is that in spite of all the heaviness, she has this, you know, and this is that Venus Jupiter, because Jupiter is levity. And, you know, she's just very unique in that she celebrates her quirks. She's very quirky, and I sure appreciate that about her. And I think that she appreciates herself for those reasons, you know, because there is a freedom in just being who you are. And so I think that she's done a really good job. And I know that in terms of raising her own children, one of the things that she really set out for it was to raise her children differently so that they didn't, you know, get thrown into this high party lifestyle and not be able to experience their childhoods. And so she tries to ground them a little bit more. And it's definitely an exciting journey for Drew because she's doing it all on her own. And she called in the experiences that would allow her to do that.
Yeah, it's like completely agree with you there. And it's like this is a quote that she said that my life was not normal. I was not a kid in school with normal circumstances. There was something very abnormal and I needed some severe shift. So that time in rehab, though she probably didn't like being there was like deep knowing she needed to be there in order to step into the direction that her soul wanted to go in.
Yeah.
And it takes a very strong, you can just sense this how strong she's had to be and has been. There's that Saturn retrograde in Cancer. You know, she had to become her own authority and go into her own emotional body and physically take that step in terms of, though she didn't make the choice, it was her choice to how she responded to it. And she responded with courage. And that's, you know, that can be applauded. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that trine to the moon really just kind of set her up with a bit of self-reliance there, emotional self-reliance, so that she could always be there for herself emotionally in spite of the experiences.
Yeah. So we're just gonna quickly just move on now to the transits, just to show you how her soul journey is played out at certain points in her life. So the first one we have is Little Lost Girl. Bess, do you want to start us off on this one first, and then you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, this was a Little Girl Lost. That was the title of the book that she published about her suicide attempt, her rehab, her emancipation, the whole thing. And I think, you know, it's interesting that you just can see some of the dynamics sort of repeating here. I mean, Mars on her south node in the 12th, you've got Sun in the 9th for publishing, you've got Jupiter in the 3rd that's assisting that as well. And then, you know, her Mercury on her Mars as well. It's like, it's just, she finally gets to create, she got to put into writing, you know, her own story.
Yeah.
Her
Because you've just mentioned
Ceres
that.
on transiting Ceres on Uranus is huge, I feel like, in this chart for reclaiming her power, right? Through writing, through her own creativity, fifth house kind of dynamic of, I'm not going to allow the trauma of my past to, you know, get in the way and continue to make me feel powerless, or that I can't make choices for myself, since Scorpio has to deal with choices. And I think for her publishing that book, I mean, also Ceres in the fifth house, Little Girl Lost, like what a perfect title, right? So
Yeah, there's a lot of energy in terms of books, writing, communication. Like you said, transit Mercury at 23 degrees Capricorn conjunct her Mars. Then her transiting Sun sitting on top of her Mercury in Aquarius. And her 3rd house, you've got Jupiter that has gone into her 3rd house in Leo, retrograde. So, you know, creativity coming forward, her creativity, expressing it into the world. So that was that. Yeah, see, that was perfect timing of that book to be released. Yeah. So the next one we had was her Ever After release.
I love
So
this
is
movie.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I just, this was sort of it was one of the most transformative works she did, she says, she recalls on, right? She said that she doesn't think she'd be the same person without having done that movie. And she said it was when she was in her early 20s. She was trying to start her company. She wanted to tell stories and make films with particular messages. And she loved playing the role of someone who didn't need to be rescued. She got to rescue herself and wanted to share that lesson with others. And that was something that set her up for the rest of her life, that knowing. And I just think it's a really beautiful message. And, you know, you can kind of see this here with the transits as well.
Yeah, especially with the transit in Pluto retrograde and Sagittarius, bang on her North Node in Sagittarius, you know, kind of her soul journey, reclaiming the soul's intention in this lifetime, and giving her that opportunity to step into that.
Yeah,
Also,
and
the
you've got
south node on her palace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Acting her midheaven, and then her Jupiter return.
I love that.
Where's it? I was just about to say, where's the transiting Neptune, which is movies? 8th
It's
house.
Aquarius in the 8th.
Yeah, 8th house Aquarius, yeah. And then public house is the 10th house, where the transiting South Node sitting on her palace, like you just mentioned. So yeah, it's sort of like, did she actually consult an astrologer for the timing of this? Because it seems a bit like that.
And Mars on her moon. Yeah. So it's like in the 2nd house with Venus there, you know, being able to assert her own needs and values to reclaim how to emotionally, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Validate herself through the choice making of the own roles that she wants to utilize in movies, and how transformative that could be for her, especially with the South Node on Pallas, Neptune, ruled by that Uranus that's sitting there pretty much on her Vesta in the 9th house. So being able to communicate that outwardly into her environment. And I think that it translated in this movie, like a movie about being so inwardly secure that you don't need to be rescued by a man. Like, look at the signatures for this, you know?
Yeah.
Right. And then seeing Pluto on that North Node close to Neptune, what perfect timing for a dream coming to actualization relative to be embodying a type of spiritual truth that she's wanted to communicate probably for a long time, and now it coming out through film. Seeing the connection to Neptune, and having that be because it's in alignment with a higher good, or coming from inspiration, that it was the perfect opportunity to help her grow and expand into her own her own work, seeing Pluto on North Node.
And do you think with Ceres transiting her 12th house, approaching her own South Node, that and being ruled by Mercury, it's a reclamation of her own inner voice as well? Through
Yeah, that's for Uranus on her Mercury too, I think.
Yeah.
So it's just the repeating signatures. I love astrology.
I'm just sitting here thinking I have a very strong feeling that Drew Barrymore is a lot more intuitive than she's let the world know, you know, and that she does trust her gut instinct. And yeah, so maybe she'll share that in the future.
I think whenever you have this type of Pisces Jupiter kind of dynamic going on, people often confuse like funny, happy-go-lucky with not having intuition. And it's very clear that, and maybe that's a way that she compensated in the past, right? And so in this lifetime, it gets to shine through. Like you can be funny, happy-go-lucky and know exactly what you want and can rely on your intuition and go after it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And the final slide that we had was sorry, we've got 2 more to go. The Golden Globes was.
Can I just say one more thing? Just
of course,
because of how full her 10th house is. I mean, I think that there's a lot that's going to be coming from Drew in the future, because, you know, part of the signature is spending your life reflecting on all of these dynamics and what you've been through and how you've dealt with it and what you're observing on the outside. And she's going to have a lot of material. I'm telling you. That's my prediction.
Yeah, and also 10th house being coming, you know, it's about maturing, becoming wiser. And so age, I feel like, is really reflected within the 10th house, like that wisdom from direct experience. So I definitely agree with that statement for sure. Love it.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so next we had the Golden Globes release. Sorry, not release, her Golden Globes award that she won. Was that for her first award, right?
Yeah, that was for Grey Gardens. And this was a big deal for her because the director did not want to cast her. You know, they were like, not that rom-com girl, like, please no. And she basically said, look, I can do this. Like, I can do this. I know this accent. It's a difficult one, but I can do it. And they, you know, they went with her, and she said she didn't speak to anyone for 4 months, and she was like in character, really prepping for this role. And it was the first time she was really, I think, taken seriously as an actress in some ways. And you can see again, like Jupiter sitting on her palace, and we've got again Uranus on her Jupiter in the 10th, and the moon was on her midheaven. It was a big night for her.
Yeah, you've also got the transiting Ceres sitting on her Neptune in Sagittarius in the 6th house. You know, her own like nurturing and being rewarded in terms of, you know, doing a movie that's in some way a service to the world. You know, there's a message in that. Whoever watched the movie, personally, I can't recall watching this movie. If I did, it would have been a long time ago. But yeah, I will definitely be watching this movie just to remember why she won that award. But yeah, like breaking that rom-com. She's got more in her, what's that word? She's got more in the repertoire than what people assume her to be.
Yeah.
I think that's Saturn coming to her Pluto. I mean, sorry, Jordyn, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna piggyback off of what Rob was saying with Ceres on her Neptune. That's also, I mean, this almost sounds so literal, but you know, a reclaiming of her authenticity in film work. Like I can be taken as an authentic actor, not just some funny, you know, haha kind of girl, especially if we're thinking about the 90s and early 2000s were brutal on women and how they were not taken serious within, I mean, you even not just actresses, but if we're looking at, you know, the Britney Spears and the Christina Aguileras and wanting to sexualize or looking at them more through an objective lens, like as objects. And like, this was her reclaiming, like, no, I can play whoever you put in front of me. It doesn't matter if there's a hard accent. I can do this and I can hone my craft and I can be taken seriously. So I love this. And with that Uranus on her Jupiter as well, that's, you know, there's the liberation from not being taken seriously in the past.
And also a surprise to the world. They probably weren't expecting her to win that award. Yeah.
Well, and I think, you know, sometimes what can happen with Pisces is Pisces can be underestimated, especially if you have a Virgo streak, right? But secretly she's been doing the inner work. And so when that comes out to manifest, then, you know, it can capture attention, and, you know, there will be a moment, or there have been moments, and there will continue to be moments where she really gets to put the fruit of her life work, which has, I think, come from introspection. Is that the, yes, introspection. And, you know, which is, you know, what that can prepare you for any role, and it can really be surprising.
Yeah, and ultimately the universe rewarded her.
Yeah, and I would
say
Pluto square. So Saturn sitting on her Pluto, or coming up to it, and so it's again like reiterating that maturation that like she really wanted to feel, and that she's having you know, there's a Pluto square there, and so it's like I have to be me. I have, you know, I have to be taken seriously. I have to be out in the world doing what I know to be true about myself and what I know I can do.
And be taken as an equal to a man. Pluto Cap squaring her own natal Pluto.
Yeah.
Which is important when you've lacked a father figure in your life, you know.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, very, very well said. And yeah, so finally we've got her show, the Drew Barrymore show. Yeah. So when did that launch actually? That is the launch date, 2020. Feels like it's been around for ages.
Yeah, relatively recent. And I think what's interesting about this is, to Stacie's point, you know, she got a lot of flack from other women when she said she was no longer going to do film. She wanted to be home with her kids, because it was like, oh, you're saying that women can't have it all. And she's like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I want to be there for my kids in a way that my parents weren't there for me. And just because you can have it all doesn't mean you should necessarily go for it all at once. And so, those are my words, not hers. Sorry. Anyway, so anyway, I just thought this transit's an interesting one, because with Ceres on her palace, it's like she found a way to, you know, blend her success in the outer world with her feminine wisdom and what she needs in order to feel like she's honoring that.
Yeah. Well, she's had that transit in Pluto retrograde. If you look at it in the 8th house on her Mars, so she's making a conscious choice, and she's making that physical direct choice, and this is what works for me, and this is what I decide to do. And she's not falling into that, is what we mentioned earlier, that trap of following the consensus, or, you know, you've built your career, you've got these awards, if you stop now, it's going to be the end. That's probably what she heard from others around her. But her saying, no, I'm going to go and mother these 2 young kids who need me. She had that awareness of, like you said, what she didn't have growing up and what she wanted to give her children.
Yeah, and that Uranus on the, you know, transiting out of the 11th, I think too, she's able to kind of bring in her tribe on the show, who she wants to have, who she wants to surround herself with, how she wants to move forward in her evolution with who she surrounds herself with.
Yeah.
We talk about how the signatures of her doing this during a pandemic and how that brought levity to the audience at this time. I mean, Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn transiting her 8th house, bringing it into society, the transiting Venus, Moon, and her 3rd house, bringing a voice to bring like levity, love into people's, you know, homes while something was going on. I think it's pretty powerful signature too, you know, that is it was the launch, so it sticks with it the whole time throughout, you know, the duration of however long she chooses to do this show.
Yeah, I also love that. Oh, please, someone else go.
I don't care. But I was just going to put in a little tiny comment, which is that I know one of the some of the critical acclaim that she got for the talk show is that it's non-threatening. which is really interesting when you look at the
Yeah.
Capricorn in the 8th house. And, that's kind of the power of it, getting to the bottom of it and being able to listen and kind of draw things out of people and have it be not non-threatening, but something that, everyone can relate to in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
And
also
she
think
looks like she's having fun. Sorry, she just looks like she's just having fun, and she's in her living room, just chatting to whoever, whichever guest is there, and just interacting.
And they cook, they do everything.
and that's Chiron opposing her Pluto, where it's like she's used this as an opportunity for healing. She's brought in her like ex-husband who she hadn't seen in 15 years or whatever, and like uses it as an opportunity to connect and show healing. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And like Stacie mentioned earlier, this isn't the end. There's definitely more to come from Drew Barrymore, and I'm personally looking forward to it. I read today that there's a possibility of another movie with Adam Sandler, and I was just like, yeah, that will be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully that will
they're
happen.
a dynamic duo for sure. I mean, it's pure gold every single time those two get together. I feel like their chemistry is amazing.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see her back on screen for sure in terms of movies. But yeah, so thank you, Liz. That was a lot of fun, especially with an actress that we all love. Right, so just moving on to our next segment, it is actually talking about movies. It is the movie of the month, and it's The City of Angels, which Deva will talk us through.
Yeah, the reason I thought City of Angels would be a good pick for Pisces is because that interface between surrendering to the unknown and as that being a push to merge with the eternal or God, goddess, or source, whichever term you happen to use. And it's like that human element of holding on to what is or what's known or what we want to be, and what a Piscean moment of surrendering we can have to it. And for me, the scene that really captures that is when it's Maggie Rice, she's the doctor, played by Meg Ryan, and she's in the operating room. And before that point, it's very Capricorn Pisces. She's, the doctor that always has never had a patient lost. She knows her stuff. She's totally professional. She's got it all together. And so that means that she can control that. When she goes into the operating room, if she has the right technique, Virgo, everything will work out. And so she goes just for a normal operation. The guy had a heart arrhythmia, and there's nothing she can do to resuscitate his heart. And she's fighting the battle as hard as anyone can fight it. And then that's when Nicolas Cage shows up as the angel Seth, who's meant to take the guy. And she looks right at him and she says, he's not going anywhere. And he's like, what? Is the total Pisces, like feeling, sensing, all that. And he's basically trying to help her let go of control, because the guy ultimately dies and she has to surrender to, it was his time to go. When he's meant to go, he will. And she's just clinging to being the doctor. And she's like, if I can't, I was doing everything right. And she was in the she ends up, just of course just beside herself, and she's in a small room and she's just crying. I felt so small. How did I feel so small? And he's also surrendering in that he falls in love with her, and he's giving up the eternal, that he, his days are just filled with serenity, peace, pretty much. Not, feeling, but not the human sense of feeling. He doesn't sense anything. He doesn't know hunger. And so he surrenders that when he falls in love with her. And he wants to fall down to earth so that he can be with her. And so it's together, this total Pisces energy of she's giving up being in control, so to speak, or giving up, I would say it's surrendering to the will of the source, that you can't control, that what's going to happen is what's going to happen outside of anything we direct. It's also kind of Mars. And he's surrendering because he's going to feel pain. he's going to feel all the emotions that we do, good, bad, and everything in between. And that's something that he wants to, so that he can also experience totality, or the full range. So to me, it's very Pisces in that it has those themes, and kind of from both angles. From one who's giving up, or not really giving up, but one who's coming down to earth and surrendering to everything that means, and one who's surrendering to the will of the above, and everything that means. So to me, there's very, very Piscean themes.
Well, with Deva, it's interesting because you've spoken about how Nicolas Cage's character decides to become human, you know, to leave that kind of Piscean world. That's perfect movie to end the Pisces series, because the next archetype is Aries. So clearly that would have been him going into the Aries, you know, physical, separating himself from source. So it's quite a timely movie. I haven't watched it in a very long time. I remember watching it when it first came out, but now I watch it, there's a different connotation to it, because of course I've evolved since then. It was released in 1998, a long time ago. But yeah, that was a nice take on that movie. Have you ladies seen this movie? Or do you remember seeing it? Yeah. And I don't even remember if it did really well or not. I can't recall that.
Oh, I think it did really well for different reasons.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it did well.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Thank you. And yeah, so we're just going to now move on to I believe it's the quote of the month, and it's from a social activist, Harriet Tubman. And can't get more Piscean than this, you know. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. And we all have that within us. You know, we all embody the Pisces archetype somewhere in our natal birth charts. And it's good to see where your Pisces is, just to understand your own Piscean nature and where you're trying to transcend in what area of your life. And yeah, so if this talk show has inspired any interaction with evolutionary astrology in particular, or astrology in general, there's a great book on natural astrology written by a host of fabulous astrologers. You can buy this book on Amazon. The link will be provided below. It is a great text to read. And and if evolutionary astrology is something you are interested in for your own personal evolution, whether it's to study or just for your self-knowledge, there is a Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. The link is in the bio. Please drop in and have a look. And if you have any questions, there is links to connect with fellow astrologers or other individuals who are interested in this body of work. So thank you for joining us today. And this is the end of a 12-month cycle. And hopefully we'll be joining you again when the new astrological year starts. So hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.